Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, where we spend a few minutes each week talking about psychology, our emotions, behavioral health. And we reflect on how these important topics are related to the gospel reading for each Sunday. Now, I point out every week that this isn't supposed to be a substitute for actually getting yourself to church or participating in therapy or counseling or going to spiritual direction if you're involved in any of those sort of practices. But like we know so well and like we've seen, things of our mind, our psychology, and our spirituality so often go beautifully hand in hand together. So if you are returning, welcome back to Gospel Minded. If this is your first time seeing one of these videos, welcome. Either way, I hope that you will hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Gospel Minded. Today marks a little bit of a milestone for me because we're at the end of the liturgical year with this Sunday, Christ the King Sunday. And it was 1 year ago at the beginning of Advent last year that I first started doing these gospel-minded videos. Certainly for me, over the course of this past year, it's been spiritually enriching and for my own behavioral health and mental well-being. It's just been edifying to go through this process. So I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too. I'm going to keep rolling these gospel-minded videos out Sunday after Sunday. So I hope you'll keep joining me. Now, Christ the King Sunday. Fascinating bit of text today, and we take a different direction because for the past weeks we've been reading from the Gospel of Mark. Well, today we transition and we go to the Gospel of John, and the reading today comes from John chapter 18, and it goes like this. Pilate summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own people handed you over to me, along with the chief priests. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my people would be fighting to keep me from being handed over. But as it is, my kingdom is not here." So Pilate said to him, "Then you are a king." Jesus answered, "You say I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Wow, remarkable and beautiful text from today's liturgy from the Gospel of John. And so appropriate, since this is the solemnity of Christ the King, that we're reading this passage from John's Gospel, where there's this dialogue between Pilate and Jesus on the nature of his kingdom. Now, like I seem to say every Sunday, there's so much that could be said here, certainly spiritually, and there's a lot that we could talk about. And so many things have been written about this passage, and a lot of important discussions have happened about this gospel text specifically. But what are we to make of it from a psychological perspective? As I think about the idea of kings and rulers, leaders, people in positions of authority, it is not unrelated to the science and discipline of psychology. There is a lot of research, and there have been many, many experiments and a lot of literature written over the course of the past several years that shows that we're, as human beings, almost, as it were, hardwired to respond favorably to people that we perceive are in positions of legitimate authority. It's almost, if you like, that we're geared towards being good followers. Now, that's not always the case, and of course there are exceptions, but generally speaking, if there is somebody in a position of authority, we want to do our best to put our good foot forward and be on the good side of that person we perceive to have authority over us. And there are many, many examples of this. Just take for example, today, if you were at church, or if you were at Mass, Did it seem pretty conventional to you? It did to me. I woke up, got ready, got my family in the car. We went to mass, and it was beautiful and lovely. Now, what if it were somewhat novel in that today, instead of our usual parish priest processing down the aisle, it was the Pope or the bishop of your diocese or somebody like that? What would your experience of Mass that day be like? My guess, and the literature backs me up on this, is that you would probably participate with a little bit more fervor. You would probably be a little bit more attentive. Why? Because there's somebody that we perceive to have some spiritual authority over us who's in this same environment now, presiding at the liturgy. And so we want to be actively engaged in a way that could attract the favor of this individual. And if you've ever been to Rome, if you've ever gone to a liturgy where the Pope is present, it's crazy. People will flock hours early to try and get a seat along the aisle for the ability to catch a glimpse of the Pope and hope that the Pope catches a glimpse of them. So that aside, think about this. You go to work. A lot of us have 9 to 5 jobs or conventional jobs where we work during the day, and maybe you have plenty of encounters with your first line supervisor, and so maybe there's nothing super special about that. But what if somebody were to come and visit your plant or your school or your organization, say from corporate? Or if you're a teacher and the superintendent is sitting in on one of your classes? The literature shows, and if you've ever had this sort of experience, your experience will tell you, I'm going to behave maybe a little bit differently in this situation. I'm going to perform even better than I normally would because I want to earn the acclaim and the favor of that person who has authority over me. And there are countless other examples of this kind of thing. Point is that as human beings, if there is somebody who leads us, who has authority over us, we want to do our best to please them, to get them to notice us. And I think, we see something similar in other parts of the gospel with the apostles. And this can be, of course, natural and good that we want to be noticed by people in positions of authority. But we know they can be problematic too. There have been all kinds of examples throughout history of leaders who abuse their power, and they use those who follow them as tools to become dictators and tyrants, oppressing people who are less fortunate and from different perspectives in life. And it can become all kinds of trouble for people who are involved with those sort of situations and scenarios. But it does prove an important point that we're geared up to follow people who have authority over us. Now, this is what I wanted to say about this psychologically speaking. We know that we want to do a good job and be good followers. What about the people that we lead as well? Because we want to follow well enough, but we also want to be good leaders. And if you're not in a position, like say occupationally, where you exercise leadership, what about in your own home? What about in your own family? Because I'm the head of my household with my family and my children. My wife, too, exercises a legitimate authority over our kids in our neighborhood. There are people that I have relationships with who look to me for certain things, and I look to them for certain things. This idea of a kingdom, the leadership that we can exercise, looks a little bit different for all of us, depending on whatever walk of life you're in. But if you're going to be a good follower and a good leader, we want to imitate the virtues demonstrated by the Lord. So the gospel today, he's talking about his kingdom at his trial. So he is demonstrating that if you're going to be a leader, you're going to have to sacrifice for the people that you're close to, and it's not going to be easy all the time. So let's bring that into your situation and my situation in my own home. Here I am with my work people, and I'm all geared up to try and please my boss or my boss two steps above. But what about the people that I am a servant leader for? The kids in my home. When my kid says, "Dad, will you play with me?" Do I look at that as like oh, here we go again. I don't want to do this. I got other stuff to do. Or do I take that as an opportunity to be a servant leader in my own household to make my child happy? What about the aging parent who doesn't have a lot of other resources, doesn't have a lot of outlets, nobody else to talk to? When mom or dad calls us or we call them, do we look at it as a chore? Like some kind of drudgery task that we have to do to kind of check the box? I think a lot of us have done that before, and maybe that is the case. But are we exercising that kind of extraordinary servant leadership, consistent with this kingly disposition that Christ manifested so well, and which we are baptized into as Christians, baptized into the person of Jesus as priest, prophet, king? If we want to imitate Jesus in his role as king and as a leader, we need to be the servant of others. And so we may be eager to put our best foot forward at our job, occupationally, professionally. We want to be good leaders for the people at our work. Cool. That's all great, and we should strive for that. But what about those people that we have a allegiance to or a responsibility for under our own roof, in our own neighborhood, within our own families and communities? I say all this because I think, especially in this time of polarized political environment everywhere, it's easy for us to turn on the TV and look at what's happening in Washington, D.C., or in our state capital. And we can grumble and complain and argue and be frustrated no matter who is in power and no matter what the situation is. There's plenty to be concerned and conscientious about. And yet, at the same time, what we can control, what we do have some capacity to address, is what's going on right here, right now, in my world. Again, under my own roof, in my neighborhood, at my office, in my environment where I find myself. That's where we can find the kingdom of God and build it up. And it kind of turns everything on its head. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. The king becomes a servant, dies for the people that he leads. Maybe that's what we need to do too, dying to ourselves to help those around us live better lives. And what does this have to do with psychology? We know that in doing these things, we're going to feel better about ourselves. We're going to have probably healthier self-esteem. But ultimately, we know that doing stuff that's hard, it's usually good for us, and it helps us flourish, even if it's uncomfortable in the moment. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I don't think that this stuff is unrelated to the solemnity of Christ the King, and certainly it's relevant psychologically. So I think that's enough for today. We'll come back next week and start a brand new year, a new season of Gospel Minded. But until then, happy solemnity. Be assured of my prayers for you. I hope you're praying for me as well. And I'll see you next time here on Gospel Minded. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Take care.